Carlson. He's an Arlington, Virginia-based artist. He was born in Champaign, Illinois, grew up in Illinois, Ohio, and Kentucky. His student has practiced with Julian Chu for 30 years. He's currently a professor at Marymont University and served on the Arlington Commission for the Art. As you all know, he's an artist, so his painting dive into the intersections of time, energy, composition, and unknown circumstances. He also thoughtfully connects sound and image in his work, collaborating with artists, poets, and composers from around the world. His painting and digital work are represented in numerous collections. He has over 24 solo exhibitions and participated in numerous group shows since 1986. If you search online, just Google it, you can find his painting. His speak title today is Field of Transformation, Taichi and Abstraction. So now it's the time for us to listen Taichi and enjoy the painting. Please welcome David Carlson.
Looks like I've got about 35 minutes, so it's really great to be here. And this is going to be completely different than what everybody's been talking about. I really enjoyed all the different talks, and I'm going to try to talk a little bit about how Tai Chi works in my art. And next slide, please. I thought it was a good idea to talk just a little bit about abstraction, to give you guys just a little primer on and what that means. And there's a really famous photographer out of Virginia, McGowan, and perception comes out of our own body. We don't have a mind separate from our bodies. I'm somebody who thinks with their body, knows just as much as any other thought they ever had. I like for my body to listen to my mind when it has a good idea. Next slide. So Emmett Gowan, by the way, this is how he approaches his work. And he's a photographer, like I said, so he's very in tune with the earth, very in tune with humanity, and just a wonderful, beautiful photographer. Abstraction. Abstract means the modification, usually natural form by simplification or distortion. This is important now. The non-verbal form of communication uses line, color, shape, and form to create a composition engaging various degrees of independence from the world. Next slide. Liang Kai, Chen Buddhism. So this is 12th century Chinese Buddhist, immortal in splashed ink. And why I wanted to show this was that his thinking about what he's doing really shows a shift in his mind. And down at the bottom, accurate representation is sacrificed to enhance spontaneity linked with the non-rational mind of the enlightened. Next slide. Yujian, Tian Tai Buddhism, mid-13th century. So look at the space. This is a landscape, and it's kind of difficult for you guys to see it, but you probably have seen a lot of Chinese art and everything, so you probably already know his work. But it talks about splashed ink landscapes that eventually inspired many Japanese Zen painters. His painting shows heavily misty mountains in which the shapes of the objects are barely visible and extremely simplified. So he's really breaking down what we think is real, like the body, and it just becomes a very simple suggestion of. So the question is, what is he doing? And why is he doing this? See, as an artist, this is what really fascinates me. I've been all over the world and I've seen many different kinds of art, and I immediately connect with it because it's nonverbal communication. Next slide. So painting, visual art, a non-verbal form of communication. I'm just going to talk a little bit about Western modern to a contemporary perspective. This is a picture of the Mona Lisa, redone by Marcel Duchamp, who was a Dada artist. And this is 1919. He put a mustache on the Mona Lisa, which was a hideous act. And there's many more funny things about this image, but what it was a rebellion against what was the establishment. So here again is a shift in thinking, trying to define modern terms. Next slide. Non-objective. Now see, this is where I think art really started to lose, it probably started to lose people way before this, but now, a term used to describe visual art which is not based on existing observable, this is important, observable forms, but rather on abstract or idealized forms, such as geometric, mathematical, imaginary, etc. Non-objective art came into existence in the early 20th century, often with much theoretical accompaniment. So a lot of thought is behind it. So artists are starting to think freely for themselves now. They don't have to follow the church or governments, but they're really exploring their own ideas. Next slide. Now, composition as object. This is a painting of Kazimir Malevich, Suprematus Cross, 1921. So what I want to do, just real quick, I teach at Marymont, and I like to talk about composition. So when we're talking about art, we're talking about painting in particular, we have a space. And if this is the canvas that I'm working on, and I'm talking about composition, there's different kinds of composition. So here's some lines that generate from the center, and they're radiating outward toward the edge of the painting, right? But if I do that same thing and I go outside the edges, it shifts and it changes. I can also bring it inward. I can bring the energy inward. So it's radiating. It can radiate out. It can come in. So energy is movable in terms of composition. So again, this is abstract space. And this thing about abstract ideas, I can start to shift around and move the center, and I bring it over to here. What happens? It activates this part of the composition. What happens in this space down here? Now, I'm going to bring this all into Tai Chi eventually, but I mean, you can start to get the idea that everything is very movable. I can also have it go this way and change the axis. So now the force is coming down on this side. What happens? Comes back up. Now a lot of this that I'm talking about is balance, symmetrical balance, asymmetrical balance, but it's dealing with the idea of balance. And I think you can start to see some kind of Tai Chi principles that are evolving. Now this is not Tai Chi doing the form, doing push hands or anything like that. This is really just kind of talking about some ideas about art and abstraction. But I've been doing my practice of Tai Chi for 30 years with Master Julian Chu. And so I can pretty much tell you that when I start to add up the idea of Emma Gowan and the body and the mind and the link between them, and I start to talk about these kinds of things, you might start to see where a little bit of Tai Chi comes into the mix. Next slide, please. There's two artists that I'm just going to talk about. I could talk probably about 100. But I chose two just to kind of talk a little bit about asymmetrical balance and structured line, shape, and space. And so when you look at this painting, and this is from 1930. So 1930, this work is pretty much blowing the minds of people. In fact, nobody would buy this work. Mondrian had to do paintings of flowers to support his cause. But I can tell you that these paintings right here, big money these days. Big, 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 big. It was revolutionary to how people were thinking about space and art. So it was challenging ideas. Now when I say asymmetrical balance, It's the left hand of the composition, the right hand, the top, the bottom, the center, the edges. All of this is coming into play. Mondrian has simplified it and boiled it down to vertical and horizontal lines, 3 primary colors, red, blue, yellow, and space. So, next slide, please. None of the laws are written there, the visuals are written in stone. So the first one you saw, the color was the predominant element. This one, it's a linear. So line is predominantly how he's thinking about the space. He's dealing with repetition and rhythmic going across. He's using color to get the eye to look to the upper left, red down, blue over here. So he's moving, he's dealing with the idea of movement through space. So it's not static. The first, oops. This is pretty much static space. If the center's in the center and it's equidistant from the edges, it doesn't move. So this is pretty dead. So the moderns were really dealing with a lot of ideas about movement. And I'm going to stop there because we'll go to the next slide. El Lissitzky, Russian constructivist. And here's another guy that's really kind of interesting. Line, plane, and form. He was an architect, so he's kind of thinking like an architect. And you know, this is what's kind of interesting also about Tai Chi is that we're all very different people. And how we think about Tai Chi has probably got influenced by who we are as individuals and how we approach things. Why I wanted to show El Lissitzky was that he plays with this kind of tension in the space of movement about to happen. Or he's playing with the right-hand side of the composition and it's weighted down. Like 2 kids on a teeter-totter, and you got the really big kid over here and he's pushing down. And so the teeter-totter comes up. But then the question is, how does he balance and how does he play with the space? Well, the counterpoint is over here. But he kind of connects everything together in this kind of architectural kind of structure that's teeter and tottering. 1919, there was a big war going on. I mean, the whole thing was, Europe was going crazy. You know, it was a very unsettled time. So I think a lot of his work captures that feeling in the moment. Next slide. Crown composition, 1922. Again, you'd have to realize people going into a museum and look at this work and it doesn't make sense. Now we look at it and think, oh yeah. You get kind of the idea of the center. And if you look down at the bottom, you'll see that this is on a little pinpoint. And this thing can go this way or this way. But how he's using the different elements is it's a game of give and take. Next slide. My work. Now for something completely different. I didn't start out like an abstract artist. I started out painting like, you know, you could tell what it was I was looking at. And over the years, I kept asking questions and changing. And this particular painting comes from 2010. We had taken a trip to Bhutan, which is just south of Tibet, just north of India. And it was just an amazing trip. As an artist, when I go somewhere, I don't paint, I don't draw. I take my phone, my camera, I shoot photos. But I open myself to the place where I'm at. So I'm like absorbing and taking in the experience. Now I want to kind of talk a little bit about Tai Chi in my work. I don't think Mondrian was thinking Tai Chi. El Lissitzky, Russian constructor, wasn't happening. But, and I gotta say, a disclaimer, my work is not about Tai Chi. If I was trying to make a painting and make a painting of Tai Chi, it wouldn't be so good, in my term. But what I do is I have ideas. So, you know, I'll ask questions. What's the reality of nature? I'll flip that. What's the nature of reality? So over the years, what's the nature of mind? So it just keeps going down into the finer subtleties of energy, really. So this painting down at the bottom, relax, spirit, soul of the work, no expectation. I can pretty much tell you I have no idea what something's going to look like when I start it. But as I start to work with it, I develop a dialogue with the painting. I put down a mark, and then I put down another mark. And then I start to have a symbiotic relationship, and I just keep working on the painting. And you know, you'll see like how this side, a broad stroke, this side, shorter strokes. But then there's a lot of transparency that's happening here. There's opacity that's happening here. So relax, spirit, soul of the work. It's about mind, and mind of the artist. And I can have a lot of clutter. But if I relax, and I have my Tai Chi mind, my relaxed mind, this is when I'm at best in my studio. Next slide. Heaven Ladder, 2010. And the titles come after. I kind of have fun. I like to play with words, play with ideas. What's a ladder? What's heaven? You know, and this is going this way. You know, life is messy. You know, it's not just, you know, it's all over the place. But, you know, I say the waist is the commander. Where's the functional axis in the work? So again, you know, I still believe in aesthetic qualities, and that's an important part of what I do as an artist. The ideas are important to me. The questions that I ask are important, but the work really, I think, comes out of my body. And I think Tai Chi, over the years, because I've been abstract since 1990, so, you know, it's like ever since I've been doing Tai Chi, this is what happens. But, you know, it's about color, it's about not color, it's about, again, the opacity, you can't see through it, you can see through it. So the yin and the yang are always at play in the visuals. Next slide. Naughty elephant. And I'll play around, like in some of the other ones, some of the things were at the side, but here it's more central. And you know, the white part almost becomes a solid. It's where the emptiness becomes a solid. So I love to just play around with thinking and different kinds of approaches. And again, still asking questions, but where's the tension? Next. Flying Baby Twister. I did this painting. I was having a show in Dallas, Texas, and I titled a couple of paintings, and I thought I'll have some fun with the Texans. And they have twisters, tornadoes, and but also there was this game we used to play as kids that had dots. Bum, 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 bum. So here's a structure, but the structure is set up by connecting the dots, if you will. So again, it's all about space. It's about big movement. It's about small movement. You know, where's the tension? You know, there's always got to be some kind of tension that's happening in the work. Again, opposition. Next slide. Horse and rider. And what's kind of interesting is kind of the central part, the central axis, there's not as much stuff in it. It's between here and this side, you know, and this side is much larger, how it's put together. This will be the horse, and this is the rider, separated from the horse. This is what I see. Most people would look at this, and you might see something completely different. This is the beauty of abstraction. Next. Pulling weeds. This was bought by Education First. It's a company up in Boston, and so they have it in their corporate offices. Next. 2013, I wanted to start working small. So I have a lot of work that I did that was much smaller, and I wanted to simplify and not spend as much time working on it, but a much more direct approach. So 1, 2, 3, and just went straight up, and I limited myself on the number of moves. Next. 2015, 1 year, 1 month, 1 day, 1 hour, 1 minute. That's about how long it took me to do this painting. So, but you know, it's also this whole idea of Tai Chi and body upright and gravity and sinking down, but then the body upright, because we're always talking about sinking, but something's coming up. And so, you know, see, as an artist, as a Tai Chi practitioner, I'm trying to understand it. It's a martial art. What does that mean? I got to own it. How can I own it? You know, I can listen to what other people are saying, but somehow I've got to own it inside myself. So I like this idea of body upright, because it also allows me to play with the idea of sinking down, but something's coming up. So you see the tension in the painting, you know, it's kind of like this vertical that's happening over on this side. And you know, it's just kind of off a little bit, because I'm not going to do that real straight up and down, because then it's going to kill the space. But then I wanted to play this side off of this side. Next. Motionless wind, which makes no sense. But I like that idea. Next. And the other side of empty. You know, I think artists, we like to paint what you can't see. And you know, I love how we talk in our class. We talk a lot about, like in Julian's presentation, the mechanics and the physicality of the body. But I'm really interested in that thing that you can't see. What is that spirit that ties it all together? You know, it's like we can talk about it, we can figure it out, we can explain it brilliantly. And yet there's something there that we can't explain. As an artist, this is where I live. This is where I like to play around with that and try to embrace it. Beautiful lady's hand. And the breath. Breath in the work is really, really important. And that shifts and changes. Again, there's no real rules to it, but it's got to have the right breath. You know, and it's like in Tai Chi Chuan, you know, the breath in the body. If my body is solid, then I'm static and it's dead. But if my body is alive and there's breath, and it can shift and change. So in the painting, there's got to be breath. It can't be just solid. It would be dead. Next. And so this is like recent work. I decided to not use color and really boil it down to about 4 moves. And I love Chinese calligraphy. I really love really old Chinese calligraphy. I can't do it, I can't read it, but man, I can make paintings. I started with a figure. I had a model, and I just would take the lines that I would see, and then I would work with the idea of wind. So I would put powdered pigment, squeeze some medium, and just squeegee like the wind. So I'm playing with this kind of line, model, wind, and then I put geometry. And then there's like 4 little dots. And each one of the things that's in this work affects the work. And so I've been working with the idea of consciousness. So this is kind of like where I've landed. And now it's getting really interesting because I have no idea. Next slide. I can only like kind of grab at it, you know, that idea of consciousness. But what goes into it, you know, memories, experience, present. Again, like just the beautiful, and I love, and I get the Chinese brushes because, you know, the American brushes can't do it, you know. But like when I'm working with this brush, you know, it's like, you see the martial art movies, you know, where both of them, they're sitting there looking at each other and they're imagining the fight, right? So I'm sitting there, I'm looking at the figure, I'm looking at, look, understanding, and then it's just, okay, it's time. And sometimes the mark goes inside the body. Sometimes I'll catch, you know, the leg, the hip, or whatever. But it's got to be right on the paper. Next. You can see that the composition still has similarities to the earlier work that I showed you guys. but it's shifted now, and it's more immediate, and again, more simplified. One more. I just worked with a model the other day because I'm starting some big paintings again, and I needed some new drawings. So Tuesday I had a model in, and I did 40 drawings in the sitting. So, and I got some good ones out of that. A few of them are really good, and a lot of them are, but they inform me in a way. So this is a way of working on ideas. One more slide. This is the last one. Yeah.
Thanks, David Carlson. Any questions for him?
So with 3D printing and even modern technologies, say like multi-dimensional, is that you think is only added one dimension for your composition as a sculpture, or is another kind of opportunity?
Well, 3D printing is more of a sculptural idea, where this is two-dimensional images. I never thought about making it 3D. That could be kind of interesting. It has nothing to do with what I do, but it could be cool.
You have some visual, right? You
Huh?
did some video.
Oh yeah, I do video too. Yeah,
Not
yeah.
3D.
Well, it's still projection, but yeah, but I don't know how to answer that question. Yes.
First, thank you for your wonderful presentation that illustrated the connection of visual art with another type of physical art. My question is the earlier painting in 1919 with the structured line and space and shape. I wonder, at that time it was not appreciated, and as you said, it doesn't make sense to the people. And now it is very valued piece of art. I wonder, during the process of this over almost a century, and who played the role to make it appreciable from the artists or from some art collectors, and who make that happen as today?
The artist has to make the work. And then back in that day, there were people that were gallerists who were selling the work, mostly in Europe. And people would go to the atelier. They loved to visit the artists. And then museums would be buying the work eventually, like the Art Institute in Chicago, the Met in New York, the Louvre. So they had collections going from antiquity, but they weren't buying that art. I mean, I think it was more the gallerists and the critics that were talking about it. So there was interest, so people knew about it. But as all things, it takes a while to get into the mix. So eventually, the track record is good. And when the artist dies, the work goes up because there's no more work coming in. That's part of the deal too. But that's how the collections happen. But I think that there's also a historical lineage. This is built on top of this, on top of this. You see. So in the moderns, they were looking at the work of the Africans. They were more aware of the Egyptian, the Japanese. I think China was still very much locked into itself, so there wasn't a lot going on in the commerce and all that stuff, the trade and all of that. So there wasn't as much of a connection. But over time, then everything starts to add up.
And is that type of particular visual arts become kind of part of the